Welcome back to another revisit of Power Rangers Dino Thunder. Today we'll be taking a look at Legacy of Power, a very big clip show that goes over the history of the Power Rangers universe. As the Dino Thunder Rangers stumble upon an archive clip that Tommy Oliver made, requiring them to learn about their own heritage as well as finding a way to rescue their mentor. Now, a lot of people talk about this mainly because we get to see all the prior Power Rangers clips. And I gotta say that, whereas nowadays we feel kind of spoiled by Easter eggs and crossovers, I think back then it felt more exciting because these were surprises back then. It's almost like every day or so a crossover would happen in the Tokusatsu universe. Like on Monday you'd have Super Sentai and Kamen Rider. On Tuesday you'd have some guy from whatever season meeting a character in the current Hasbro era. Or maybe at one point you might have Gokaiger rubbing its face in it, trying to show off the fact that its series turns 10 for the 1 millionth time. But back then it felt more exciting because, from my perspective, as someone that was not fully aware of Power Rangers back then, beyond just Ninja Storm and Dino Thunder, I was excited to learn more about the past. Make sure I had myself all the Disney reruns that. I had all the Saban era reruns that were made on Jetix, Toon Disney, and wherever else to put the Power Rangers back then. And I will admit I did have myself a Lost Galaxy non-transforming Megazord with all the stickers peeled off from a prior use, a Lightspeed Rescue Pink Ranger figure from McDonald's, a Time Force coloring book, and 3 juice bottles that have the Wild Force helmets on. But Ninja Storm was the first Power Ranger season that I fully delved into, where I had some of the toys and saw the series. And Dino Thunder was one that I saw even more, as that was one that I've seen from the beginning, which, honestly, maybe I did, or maybe the first episode I've seen was when Tommy and the other Rangers lost against the White Ranger. I gotta remember. It's been a while, it's been so long. That was 2004. My young brain was, learning a lot of shit back then. But, the fact that we get to learn about the Power Rangers is pretty big. It's a big deal if you ask me. So, we get to see stuff like Mighty Morphin, as well as the fact that the Rangers are basically learning about how Tommy Oliver was once a Power Ranger. We see the events for Season 2, and Season 3, we get to see stuff like the fact that Tommy Oliver became the White Ranger, Jason, Trini, and Zach were replaced by Rocky, Aisha, and Adam. We get to see stuff like Lord Zed show up, the Thunderzord's destruction, the appearance of Ninjor, as well as Rito Revolto. A lot of stuff that was mentioned with Mighty Morphin because it was a very big series. We had 3 seasons overall. Whereas nowadays, we get 2 seasons because of the Nickelodeon scheduling mandate, or 1 year after starting with Zeo. It felt like a massive time, especially considering the fact that Power Rangers, mainly Mighty Morphin itself, was seen as a big deal, along with the likes of other shows that were on the networks, like Ninja Turtles, Sailor Moon, Pokemon, and Beast Wars. 90s stuff. Most of it's pretty good, I gotta say. But I gotta also mention the fact that I remember listening to people complain about Beast Morphers episode making bad, having some of the poor sound quality or dubs for specific characters. Andros didn't really sound like Andros. Lord Zed especially didn't sound like Lord Zed. And looking at the audio quality, or listening to the audio quality from Mighty Morphin, at least, for example, compared to Dino Thunder, you get a massive difference. There's a bit of a difference, honestly. It's not that big of a difference, which is why I sort of interrupted myself, but basically, Mighty Morphin's audio sounded a little quieter than Dino Thunder's audio quality, even when none of the Dino Thunder characters are talking. Which also kind of, distracted me a bit from that sort of fact, because I was mostly paying attention to the way the characters spoke, the characters sounded, the music, the tone. Because everything about Mighty Morphin is different from Dino Thunder solely for the fact that they're from different decades. Like, Mighty Morphin definitely screams 90s with its colors, fuzziness, aesthetics, whereas Dino Thunder screams more modern. I mean, it's 2004, we're in 2021, but in plenty of ways, Dino Thunder feels more modern because I can almost expect settings like that to be in 2021 to some extent. Maybe not the vehicles, maybe not the technology, but you get what I mean. So we pretty much get to see stuff like that. And it was also kind of interesting that looking back, because I already know what happens with Mighty Morphin, but I just realized now that the way they replaced Kimberly with Catherine felt a little more natural than the replacement of Adam, Rocky, and Aisha's original predecessors, Jason, Zach, and Trini, because it was three characters you had to replace. They all had to leave the show because the actors were not happy with the pay and they got fired. Whereas in Universe, it was explained by them pretty much saying, "Oh, hey, we got to go somewhere for the 1 millionth charity or 1 millionth public event," which, geez, it is. It's honestly kind of better than most so-called freedom fighters by today's standards. Mainly the Twitter users that are stuck on Twitter every day, but that's a different story. So that kind of made me laugh a bit. But what also made me laugh was the fact that, again, going back to when Beast Morphers had the different audio, I remember distinctly hearing like the Rangers from in space saying "Power Rangers, yeah," when the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers first morphed, and it kind of fell out of place because those didn't really sound like Mighty Morphin. I mean, I've known Mighty Morphin and I've known In Space. Those two seasons are distinct from one another. So when I hear like the In Space dialogue used for the Mighty Morphin characters, it doesn't sound right. And it kind of got even funnier when Tommy Oliver and Jason were posing up close for when they first morphed together, and there was some very non Jason David Frank, non Austin St. John dubbing put in. I don't know why. Maybe it's because they were talking over each other and like they didn't want to like sort of confuse what was going on with the way Tommy spoke, present day Tommy. And yeah, it's kind of funny how that all worked out. And you know, like looking back now, I kind of feel it's a little hilarious that uh, Kimberly would sort of be that sort of character when she approached Tommy because she pretty much seemed very different from what we got at Kira. Kind of random like transition, but it's just kind of, like again, it's kind of funny the way that Mighty Morphin characters were written from Dino Thunder, and I'm already going on with about Mighty Morphin. So I'll go with Mighty Morphin one last thing about how we kind of didn't really get much of an explanation of what happened to Aisha, but more importantly, where are the Alien Rangers? Like the Alien Rangers were not really there. Like, hell, they weren't even present at all. Now, like, granted, I have seen the episode once again a few days ago. Maybe I should have watched the video one more time before preparing my recording sessions, but I swear there was no mention of the Alien Rangers whatsoever. I mean, okay, sure, the Alien Rangers story arc where the kids, or the teens, became kids again was stupid. I mean, understandably, I think it's because they were filming the Mighty Morphin movie, or they're about to film Zeo. I don't know, like, there was so much going on with the Mighty Morphin stuff back then, it's kind of crazy to think about. But, like, that, like, you got to mention the Alien Rangers at some point. Like, they get neglected plenty of times, and I wouldn't be surprised if Hasbro doesn't get to them right away for the Lightning Collection, because they are Mighty Morphin nonetheless. And as a result of not mentioning Mighty Morphin's Alien Rangers, we also don't get an explanation of where Tanya comes from. It's kind of funny, too, because the average person who didn't pay attention would think, wait a second, why is Aisha different? Why is she called Tanya now, or whatever? But in Universe, Aisha went to Africa to look for her Zeo Crystal, and she met Tanya. And Tanya took over her role so that Aisha, now with her knowledge, can help protect her place. Kind of like a typical sort of similar looking character replaces a similar looking character. But then again, like it was all right. It was a decent transition for characters on the same level as with Kimberly and Catherine in hindsight. But we get to Zio, and we also get to mention the fact that the Gold Ranger was there with Jason coming back. No mention of Billy though. I mean, generally speaking, you kind of we kind of expect that because he did feel important. But maybe we're just thinking about seeing, I guess, the thought of having Dino Thunder back on YouTube. But within space, then we get to Turbo, where the Rangers shift into that sort of word one more time. And it's pretty alright when it comes to mentioning the fact that what happened with Diva Talks and the Ranger replacement, which is even bigger than the Season 2 Ranger transition. But I gotta say one thing about use of Justin, the Blue Turbo Ranger, is that he definitely screamed 1990s. Like, he has the haircut, he has the look, the voice, the outfit. He screams 1990s. He screams the kind of kid that would show up in any like Lego Star Wars commercial, and any sort of Game Boy commercial, any Sega commercial, any commercial that would have a kid in it just so they get their attention. And like for all the crap people say about Jake Lloyd's performance of Anakin, like at least he feels a little more natural, whereas Justin definitely screamed 1990s, and more so than Jake did. But that's pretty much an irrelevant character to talk about. I will say, though, that the way the footage, this audio, was used for other seasons after Mighty Morphin was handled better. Didn't sound too much like they were trying to dub over the voices or anything like that. Maybe it's because, to my theory, since the footage for the later seasons but made before Dino Thunder or Ninja Storm didn't sound as old or as incompatible with their with their then modern hardware, that would be the reason why. Maybe. Then we get Twin Space, and everyone's pretty much looking into the last chapter of the Zordon era, with the likes of Andros helping out the Turbo Rangers as they become Space Rangers. We also get to see stuff like Zane return, mention of Astronema. Weirdly, no mention of things like the final battle. I think either Tommy was unaware of what happened to Zordon, who pretty much told Andros to kill him so he can purify the world, or he probably didn't want to think about it. I mean, there was a plan for Andros to say that in Forever Red, but that would probably piss off the wrong Rangers, Jason and or Tommy. It's kind of like a weird thing to remove because that felt very crucial to the story arc of its space, but I guess Tommy Oliver wasn't focused on that. I mean, there was more detail put in on the events he was in more than the events used for after Turbo. In the meantime, while the Rangers try to look for a way to gain access towards Mesogog's base, Mesogog is interrogating Tommy and making him extract any sort of life source or power source from the crystal they found, which would practically require Mesogog to kill him if he refuses to, and because Tommy Oliver is Tommy Oliver, he's not going to budge. Which is a good thing because, Tommy Oliver is one that doesn't give up. But back to that, the Rangers go over Lost Galaxy, which was more of a refresh of sorts of the Power Rangers story. We get to see Lightspeed Rescue, which is more of a soft reboot, or feels more like a reboot in a way than Lost Galaxy did. Like, Lost Galaxy definitely felt more like a soft reboot of sorts when it comes to the fact that the Power Rangers were transitioning from continuing a part of the story that was done with the Zordon era to doing their own thing, and Lightspeed Rescue becoming more of its own thing. Hell, you can almost imagine that Lightspeed Rescue would be the first Power Rangers season in its own world if you didn't want to make everything seem so connected. And well, it makes sense too, considering the fact that their powers are more man-made, whereas everything else was more of alien technology. Lost Galaxy footage was somewhat brief, but I did like the fact that Tommy mentioned Leo using the large amount of power from his Battleizer to kill Trakina, which makes sense considering the fact that she was basically terrorizing the colony that was in space. We got to see the Lightspeed Rangers once again with their footage, which honestly the footage used for like the base especially, the fact that it feels more 60 frames per second compared to the rest of the series felt kind of interesting. It definitely gave Lightspeed a more uh, sci-fi feel to it that a lot of shows from the '90s and 2000s had. Feels nostalgic as well in some ways from like the TV shows that I'd see from like my dad watching like Star Trek. If there was a Star Trek from the 2000s or Stargate SG-1, I don't know. We also got Time Force, and interestingly, we get to see the fact that we got Ryan Mitchell for the Titanium Ranger for Lightspeed Rescue, talking about how he was needed, and with Eric and Time Force, we see how he was pretty much required to know that it takes more than just the power to be a hero, but it's also like the responsibility and the like, which makes sense too, because the Quantum Ranger was definitely a uh, much more of an anti-hero than a full-on Ranger. Although he did learn how to fit in better with the team, and it's also great that they didn't just go over it too briefly, as I would expect, because Time Force was fairly recent, and you would expect them to go over Time Force less, but they really didn't. And it was also interesting how the Rangers would assume Time Force can help them out with time travel in hopes of them rescuing Tommy before he got kidnapped. Obviously, it didn't work, but at least we got to see Connor destroy one of the computers before it starts to regain its power once again, or maybe like access towards the location of the Invincible portals for the uh, access to Mesogog's lair, stuff like that. We see Wild Force, which is one of the last two seasons that came out before Dino Thunder did, and it was fairly brief. We got to learn about the Rangers, and it was great to see what was basically a transition season, because the feel of each like some of the seasons, like the feel for most of the seasons definitely feels different. Like Mighty Morphin to Turbo definitely screams '90s. In Space to Time Force definitely feels very uh like more sci-fi feeling in some ways. Definitely considering the fact that it was mostly meant for like an older audience. The Power Rangers fans from the '90s were growing into older people. You would expect them to be hooked onto your shows while still appealing to your kids, like your kid audience, and that did a pretty good job. And Wild Force definitely has a more back to basics feel with its tone, but it's more like a mix between like the sort of like serialized, more uh, like older audience feel for In Space to Time Force, and the traditional tone of Power Rangers that fit in well with the 2000s or the early 2000s with the Disney era. And then we go to Ninja Storm, which definitely has a sort of like distinct feel. And even though Ninja Storm was one that we already saw, it was great that they went over it. And I gotta say that it was not only great to see Connor mention the fact that he had a twin brother that went to the Ninja Academy, but we also before he, I got too excited, I kind of messed myself up. Like even before this episode, in the Day of the Dino episode alone, Mesogog referenced Lothor, and that was actually kind of a like thing I didn't expect, because it's been so long since I saw the episodes proper. I think I saw the Megazord debut, I saw the Ranger debut, but I don't remember him saying Lothor until just watching it recently, and it kind of blows my mind, because like you wouldn't think that they would actually reference a prior character right away. Nowadays they do that. I mean, nowadays I can imagine like Zato saying, "Oh, hey, who's Grum, or who's Venjix?" And meanwhile, immediately I would pretty much say, "Oh, did you know that Nate made fun of uh, that guy Xander from Samurai?" But like the fact that a season that was or a series of Power Rangers that really wasn't initially seen as connected, because fans were worried that the continuity for the Power Rangers series would be thrown away because Disney wanted to have its own fresh start. And while Ninja Storm failed like a soft reboot, or a major one at that, in terms of how it is initially seen, Dino Thunder brought some of the connected stuff and treated it as small fan service, but made sure that everything was in the same world at the time. And yeah, it's kind of thing that mind blows me, the fact that Lothor got mentioned way sooner than I thought. And it's even before we even get to see him in the Dino Thunder Ninja Storm crossover. Oh my god, I can't wait to see that. But once they cover Ninja Storm, the Rangers get access towards the locations of the portals, and now they're set with a new mission that they'll go to in the next episode. That being the preparation of rescuing Dr. Oliver. So, I gotta say that this was a longer review than the last one, but can you blame me? Like, there's so much to talk about, especially now that I have the experience of a Power Rangers fan that has seen a lot. Especially when it comes to like comparing how I see it now compared to how I saw the Power Rangers franchise back then. Because all this sort of appreciation and retrospectives definitely give you the thought of, holy crap, there's a lot more than I remember, which is especially true with the Disney era. Because people usually take Power Rangers for granted and just write off as some sort of stupid kids show. And it doesn't help that the Neo Saban era was like that too. But I remember a time when the Disney era definitely felt more interesting, it felt more exciting, and even if the continuity wasn't exactly as super duper connected as it is nowadays, it felt more of like a reward in retrospect and was less, okay, here's your schedule for when to expect these spoilers or these Easter eggs, and more about, psst, hey, keep your eye out, you might want to find a surprise. Especially as someone that was learning about Power Rangers and things like the crossovers with Ninja Storm and Dino Thunder for this season and the next one involving SPD. Things like Boom showing up in Mystic Force before the events of SPD. Once a Ranger, like all that was pretty much like major surprises, whereas nowadays with the way the internet is and the way the Power Rangers fandom is obsessed with looking for details before complaining about them when they show up in international spoilers. Yeah, it's kind of a crazy thing. But that being said, I was happy to revisit Legacy of Power, and I recommend you guys do so as well. So that does it for today. I'll see you next time where we go over the rescue of Tommy Oliver and his return as a Power Ranger, for when he is now back in black.